Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hello everyone, how are you today? I hope you all in a good condition this morning. So, this morning we will learn about narrative text. But before starting the lesson, I will take your attendance to find out who is present in this class. Okay, after this attendance session, I think everyone is ready to take part in the learning process. So I'll start right away. So today we will learn about narrative text and the elements and structures. But before entering into the material section, first of all, I want to explain the objective of our lesson today. First, I will explain the terminal objective. Terminal objective of our lesson today is student can define what narrative text is. And the second, student can develop their ability to write effective narratives. And the enabling objective is student can have an idea of what narrative text is, and student will be able to identify the structure of a narrative text. Next, student will be able to identify the element of narrative text. Next, student will be able to write a well-structured narrative using a clear plot. And the last is student will be able to revise and edit their narrative text. Jadi, tujuan objektif hari ini kita adalah siswa dapat mendefinisikan apa itu teks naratif. Kemudian, siswa dapat mengembangkan kemampuannya untuk menulis teks narasi atau teks naratif yang efektif. Jadi, umumnya narrative text is a type of text that focus on stories or narratives. Narrative text usually contains a storyline that describes a series of events that occur in a certain time sequence. The main purpose of narrative text is to entertain, teach a lesson, or inspire the reader through the story being told. Jadi, naratif teks ini adalah teks dengan jenis yang berfokus pada cerita atau narasi. Naratif teks biasanya berisi alur cerita yang menggambarkan suatu rangkaian peristiwa yang terjadi dalam suatu urutan waktu tertentu. Kemudian, tujuan utama dari teks naratif ini adalah untuk memberikan hiburan, memberikan pengajaran atau pelajaran, dan yang terakhir, memberi inspirasi atau menginspirasi pembaca melalui cerita yang diceritakan. Okay, after knowing the definition of narrative text, now I will explain about the characteristic of narrative text. The first is telling a story. Second, using time sequence. Next, has character and conflict. Next, building plot. Use descriptive language, use narrative sentence, and the last, presenting a message moral. So, I'll explain the first, telling stories. Narrative text primary purpose is to present a story to the readers. It may involve fictional or non-fictional events, and often aim to entertain, inform, or inspire the audience through the narrative. Next, using time sequence. Narrative texts typically follow a chronological order or a specific sequence of events. This allows reader to understand the progression of the story and the relationship between different story elements. Next, has character and conflict. A narrative text usually features characters who drive the story forward. These characters can be protagonists, antagonists, or supporting character. Conflict, whether internal or external, is often present to create tension and keep the reader engaged. Next, building plots. The plots in narrative text refer to the series of events that make up the story. Narrative text develop plots by introducing characters, setting the stage, establishing conflict, and presenting resolutions or outcomes. Next, use descriptive language to enhance the reader experience and create imagery. Narrative texts employ descriptive language. This involves the use of sensory detail, metaphors, and other literary devices to paint a picture in the reader's mind. Next, use narrative sentence. Narrative sentence employs sentences that advance the story and provide relevant details. This sentence describes action, event, setting, and character. Then it keeping the readers immersed in the narrative flow. Next, or the last is presenting moral message. While narrative texts entertain readers, they often contain underlying message or morals. Through the story and its event, narrative texts can explore themes, convey lessons, or provoke thought and reflection. After knowing the characteristics of narrative text, I will explain the three structures of narrative text. The first is orientation or introduction. This section introduces the reader to the background of the story, such as the place, time, and main character in the story. And the next, complication. This section highlights the conflicts or problems faced by the character in the story. Usually, there is a conflict or obstacle that must be overcome by the main character. And the third or the last, this section called resolution. This section describes how the conflict is resolved and provides a resolution to the story. Usually, there is a climax where the tension reaches its peak before the end of the story. Next, we move to the element in narrative text. In narrative text, there are 6 elements. There are time setting, place, story theme, character, atmosphere, and last, conflict and resolution. Okay, the first, time setting. Time setting refers to the time or era in which the story takes place. It includes information about a specific year's month, day, season, and even time. The timing provides a temporal framework for the story and help the reader understand the story time context. The second is place. Place or setting is the physical location where the story takes place. It can be a city, a village, a house, a forest, and etc. Detailed description of place help form mental picture for the reader and provide context for the events that occur in the story. Next is story theme. The theme of the story is the idea or message the author wants to convey through the story. This can be themes such as friendship, love, sacrifice, adventure, forgiveness, or personal journeys. The story theme provides deeper direction and purpose for the narrative text. Next is character. Characters are individuals or entities involved in the story. They can be the main character, like protagonist, or supporting character, or we usually call antagonist. And character in stories usually have characteristics and traits that set them apart from one another. Good character development gives an emotional and psychological dimension to the story. Next, atmosphere. Atmosphere refers to the emotional or psychological atmosphere created in the story. It can be tense, happy, mysterious, scary, or romantic. A well described atmosphere helps the reader feel and connect with the feeling conveyed by the story. Last is conflict and resolution. Conflict is the opposition or obstacle faced by the character in the story. This can be an internal conflict that within the character or an external conflict with the another characters. Resolution is the way in which conflicts are resolved. The conflict and its resolution provide surprise, suspense, and fluidity to the storyline. All of these elements work together to create a strong and engaging narrative. By paying attention to each of these elements, writer can build stories that are cohesive and captivative readers. Okay, maybe that's all for explanation about the definition of narrative text, structure, and elements. Are there any questions up to here? If not, I will immediately give an example of narrative text entitled The Magical Forest for you to practice to identify the structure and elements in it. I will give you a time to identify the existing structure and element. After that, I will give the correct answer regarding the example I gave. Oke, sekarang saya akan memberikan jawaban dari hasil identifikasi kalian dari contoh yang telah saya berikan tadi dengan naratif teks yang berjudul The Magical Forest Adventure, di mana tiga struktur yang ada di sini. Untuk struktur pertama yaitu orientation ada di paragraf pertama. In a remote village there is a boy named David. Dan di sini ada unsur tempat dan unsur karakter, di mana unsur tempat yang ada di sini ada di remote village. Kemudian karakternya ada di David, yang juga adalah pemeran utama atau karakter utama dari cerita The Magical Forest Adventure ini. Kemudian struktur kedua atau the complication ada di paragraf kedua sampai paragraf keempat, di mana paragraf 2 sampai 4 ini adalah cerita yang berfokus pada pengembangannya sampai pada belum masuk akhir cerita. Kemudian bagian akhirnya yaitu resolution ada di paragraf terakhir, di mana David arrives home with a happy face and tell his family about his magical adventure. After giving you explanation and exercise to identify structure and elements, I think now I will give you time to do the assignment, which is the task that I give is that you have to make your own narrative text story by including all the elements and the structure that I explained earlier. So now, please prepare your stationery and start writing about your own narrative text. And also, while working on it, if there's anything you don't understand, you can ask me directly. Okay, because our time is almost up, now collect your work, then I will give you a conclusion regarding today's lesson. So, today, we are learning about narrative text, where this narrative text is a text that focuses on a series of events in certain time sequence. The main purpose of narrative text is to entertain, teach a lesson, or inspire the reader through the story being told. This narrative text has the following characteristics. The first is telling story, using time sequence, has character and conflict, building plots, and use descriptive language. Then after the characteristic, this narrative has a structure in the story, including orientation, complication, and resolution. Then the structure that is not mandatory in this narrative text is reorientation. Then after knowing the structure, you also have to know the elements, and these elements are time setting, place, story time, character, atmosphere, and conflict and resolution. So maybe that's all for our class today. See you next week. Thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.